This is part 3 of Life Skills for the B.Ed Honours course, and we are looking at life skills for the senior primary phase, and we start off with the rights and the properties of others. First of all, let's look at the definition of crime. Crime is an act against someone or something that is unjust, senseless and disgraceful and unlawful. We distinguish between different crimes. The first crime is property crimes, which includes burglary, which is the unlawful entering of a structure to commit a felony or theft. Also arson, which is the willful or malicious setting alight or burning of property. Theft, which is unlawfully taking another's property. And also vandalism, which refers to the unlawful damage caused to another person's property. There are also some new or notable crimes that we have to take note of as well in life skills. The first one is referred to as white-collar crime, and that refers to when an individual of a higher social status is dishonest. The blue-collar crime, in contrast, is a crime committed by an individual of a lower social class. We also get to do with hate crime, which is a crime that is aimed against a certain religion, belief, race, ethnicity, or even against a person's sexual orientation. Identity theft, which is becoming more and more common, is the unlawful use of another person's identity in order to obtain financial gain. Organized crime has to do with street gangs, but also involve cartels sometimes. We get to look at terrorism, which is the using or the threatening of violence against civilians, and it usually is to achieve certain political or ideological goals. Now, the next thing we need to look at is how do we go about if we want to report a crime. At the police station, there are certain procedures that you need to follow. First of all, inform the police officer on duty that you are there to report a crime. He will then ask you to write down everything that you know. It will also be good to ask the officer his details so that you can have that in case you have to refer to that at a later stage. Give your statement, as I said, by writing it down if possible. Leave your contact details in order for the police to contact you once they have caught the suspect and they perhaps have other questions to ask you. If you do not want people to know that you are reporting the crime, it is possible to remain anonymous. Then you simply phone the police, or you tell the police if you went there in person that you prefer to remain anonymous. When we look at the statement, write out a statement giving all the details that you can remember about the crime. Answer all questions in as much detail as possible so that the police will be able to put the information together. Then there's also a notice to the victim. This is a form which provides information about the support services and the name of the police officer dealing with a case. The police officer should also be able to explain the investigation process to you, and you can also tell the police officer if you wish to be informed of what happened or what the update is on catching the suspect. Like we said, if you want to report a crime anonymously, it's very possible. You simply call your nearest police station and you do not have to leave a name once you have reported the crime. We'll look at peer pressure next. Now, the definition of peer pressure is the influence from the peer group in order to get you to change your behavior and your attitudes and values so that you conform to the group's norms. It doesn't always have to be negative, it can also be positive, but we look at negative peer pressure first. Now, sometimes we have to conform to a certain style, taste, appearance, and ideology and values, which is not positive. And this is very true for the teenagers especially. They have a very large need to form part of a group, and sometimes this can cause the learner to get involved in delinquency, drug abuse, sexual behavior and reckless driving, and all of these usually occur in the company of the peers. Peers that usually seem to be the popular youth are often associated with deviant behavior like alcohol and drug abuse. We also find that these so-called popular learners usually have lower grades as they spend more time worrying about their social life than they do about studying. Young girls who are pressured to conform to certain norms due to peer pressure often get involved in sexual relationships that they were not ready to, which leads to teenage pregnancy. What happens when the youth decides to reject the negative peer pressure? He often faces external conflict for failing to conform. But on the other hand, if he gives in to the negative peer pressure, he will experience internal conflict as the norms that he has conformed to will not adhere to his own personal values. Now, saying no to negative peer pressure. This can be very difficult, especially when you're the only one that says no. The learner will learn to be very assertive in such cases. He will have to have self-confidence to stand firm and to be able to walk away and resist doing the things that is against his or her values. Last of all, we find that people with strong values are often able to help those who are not as strong to resist peer pressure, and they can help others to understand that it's often better to walk away from negative peer pressure than to give in to it. Now, what are the guidelines to follow when the pressure is on? The best advice you can give somebody is to listen to their gut feeling. If you feel uncomfortable doing something, you know that it's wrong for you. You should also try to plan ahead when you know you are going to be exposed to pressure situations. For instance, if you know you are going to a party and things might happen that are not good for you, you may ask a friend to keep an eye on you. You can also ask parents or friends if they'll be willing to come and fetch you if you call them when you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. One should practice learning to say no without feeling uncomfortable about it. Best advice is also to hang out with people who share the same values as you do. You can also use the last method here, which is blaming the parents, telling your peers that if your parents found out, you will be in tremendous trouble, and in that way you take a bit of the pressure off yourself. Now, as I said, there's also something like positive peer pressure. Sorry, I left out the last point there. Obviously, if you are in a dangerous situation and under peer pressure, you must immediately get help, usually an adult's help. Now, coming to positive peer pressure, sometimes peer pressure can have a positive effect, and that is when it is able to initiate positive change. Something that is unacceptable becomes socially more acceptable, and one encourages more positive behavior, such as, for instance, volunteering to help out at a charity or performing better at school. It's a very useful tool in leadership, and to guide your learners who are part of the school council to practice this is an excellent example of influencing others positively. Please keep in mind that making one's own decisions is very hard, but once other people are also involved, it becomes even harder. Learners with low self-confidence will especially struggle with this because they tend to follow rather than lead, and they are more likely to seek their peers' approval by giving in to challenges or suggestions. When a learner is new to a group or inexperienced, he or she will also be more likely to give in to peer pressure. Now we move over to the methodology. Teaching, learning methodology and resources in life skills specifically. Let us remember that promoting living skills is the main aim of teaching life skills. We want to make a difference in the mind of the learners and affect their knowledge, attitude, skills, and the capacity of the young people so that they can contribute positively and actively in society. The life skill teacher should have a very strong commitment to the subject and aim to guide the learners to become worthy humans and citizens. Teachers should focus very closely on classroom practices which broaden learners' environment for teaching and learning. We need to equip learners for life, skills they need for life. We need to engage them with valued forms of knowledge. We need to help them to recognize the importance of prior experience, and we need to move teaching and learning forward. Obviously, the life skill teacher has to assess the learning outcomes and actively engage learners in different activities. The life skill teacher should foster both individual and social processes as well as outcomes. Furthermore, one should recognize the importance of informal learning as well and strive to establish the commitment to lifelong learning in each of our learners. The teacher is also often part of developing policies which will be applied in the life skills subject as such. Now we look at different teaching and learning strategies also under this topic. Why do we need to take note of this? Because different teaching and learning strategies will enhance the learning and understanding of the learner. The first one, or the type of learning that we look at, is active learning. When the learner is actively involved in the learning process, it improves understanding as well as the retention of the information. And this leads to the effective development of higher order as well as cognitive skills. The next type of learning is collaborative learning. This refers to when learners work together to accomplish a certain goal. Discussions deepen learning and motivation and allows the learner to develop his or her own views. Experiential learning, learners are motivated to learn by doing something. You can use games and simulations which can enrich their learning and that can help them to solve problems in real life. The inquiry-guided learning, you encourage learners to do research about a topic. Then we come to learner-centered teaching, which you've no doubt heard about before. Here we see the learner as the center of learning. He or she takes responsibility for their own learning, and the teacher is responsible for facilitating the learning. Thus, we shift the power in learning to the learner. The second last bullet, problem-based learning. Here, learners are presented with a problem and they need to solve or seek solutions in groups. Service learning. This occurs when learners need to provide a service in the community, for instance, going to the SPCA and helping there, or going to an old age home and helping senior citizens. Next, team-based learning. Learners rely on each other to complete a certain task or a project. We can also use case studies very meaningfully in teaching and learning because it's helpful when learners learn about other people who might face the same problems that they do, and they might have solutions for these problems. One can give assignments that each learner can complete by him or herself. You can also engage learners in debates to give them an opportunity to voice their own opinions. Role plays and simulations are an excellent tool to engage learners in the teaching and learning process as well. This brings us to the end of Unit 2. In Unit 3, we are going to look at the selected content of the junior secondary phase and the related teaching methodology issues as well. So we kick off in this unit by looking at career guidance. Now, mention of brain exercises is one of the first topics there, and what we can see is that they note that every nerve and cell in your body is part of a network that contributes to your intelligence as well as your ability to function. If you employ brain exercises regularly, this can help you to concentrate better as well as improve your reflection and the speed that you work with. There are a lot of exercises that you can go and look at in more depth. Let's just quickly see. They refer to the energy yawn, the cross crawl, the energizer, the belly breathing, etc. Think of an X, the thinking cap. So there are several exercises that are meaningful that you can teach your learners, and each of them have a different function or a different effect on the learner. The advantages of the brain exercises is that it helps a person to become more motivated, to concentrate and listen better. It can help you during some tricky times. Here are some of the effects. As I said, it can help you in situations where you need to stay calm, in problem-solving situations, staying positive, goal setting, being more assertive, up to reading and handling stress. So for each of the exercises, there will be a certain aspect in the learner that can be improved by practicing the exercise. Motivation. Now we distinguish between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. When you are intrinsically motivated, it means the motivation comes from within you, and it usually has the root in the fact that you are fascinated or passionate with what you are doing. If you are extrinsically motivated, it means that you need something or someone else to motivate you, to get you to do something. And there are advantages and disadvantages of both these types of motivation. We as teachers need to look at the factors that can influence the learner's motivation. And the first thing is love and acceptance. When children know that they are loved and accepted, they are always more motivated to succeed in tasks, and they are more likely to complete it successfully than a child that fears punishment if he doesn't complete the task. If we look at the home environment, the child will flourish in a peaceful, loving environment, which contributes to the child being more motivated and successful. Poverty has an influence on the learner. If a learner's basic needs are not met, for instance, he or she comes to school hungry, obviously the child will be less motivated to work well. The parents' expectations. If we do not believe in our children, then they will not feel motivated. So believe the best of your children, and they will also strive to achieve that. Parents' expectations of school, so not of the learners but of school itself, when they unknowingly talk about teachers and the school in a negative way, this will lead children to believe that school is not that important, and as well that their teachers are not to be respected. Cultural beliefs. In some cultures, girls are still seen as inferior and boys are still expected to take care of the cattle instead of going to school. This will cause a child to feel less motivated to perform in the school environment. If we look at factors in school that can motivate a child, so that these are the things that we can do in class to help our children to be motivated, we can look at the classroom structure. The structure should meet the child's basic needs, thus the child should feel safe and secure in class. The teacher's behavior, he should have a positive behavior both to the learners as well as the school and the subject, and this will encourage enjoyment. If the teacher feels negative towards the study material, this will negatively impact on the child's motivation. Also, once again, expectations of the teacher. When the learners know that the teacher expects them to perform well, they are more likely to study hard and they are more motivated to progress and achieve good marks. The teaching strategies that you use, a child will be more motivated if the material that you use is relevant to their lives. Self-efficacy. Now what this refers to is the child's belief in his own ability. So the belief that he is able to successfully accomplish the tasks he or she is given. Assignments. If we give assignments, we must be very sure that the challenge is realistic. It should not be too difficult or too easy, and always give feedback promptly. We should praise good work, and then we should ensure future motivation to complete assignments. Competition. Competition can be very healthy by setting specific goals that should be achieved in a limited period of time. We put the learner's competition spirit to work. A feeling of success. It's very important that when learners achieve something, that they experience that feeling of success, that their efforts has actually brought them something. This will help them to understand that they are in control of their own learning and behavior, and they'll be more likely to do well in school. Part of study skills is time management. Now the definition, or if we look at the essence of time management, is to plan and exercise conscious control over the amount of time you spend on specific activities with a purpose to increase effectiveness, efficiency, as well as productivity. Keep the following in mind when you try to manage your time effectively. An effective environment is important. In other words, you should be organized. You should have your stationery, your books, and all the material you need at hand. Protect your own time. That means sticking to the time given and having short and long-term goals, which you review regularly. Once you've achieved a goal, you'll tick it off and you can set new goals for yourself. Prioritize when you are managing your time. Number the tasks from A, B, and C to, in other words, from the most important to the least important, and always make sure that you complete the most important tasks before you go over to the less urgent tasks. Get back on track. This refers to if something or someone leads you or distracts you or interferes with what you are doing, get yourself back together, sit down, start planning again, and study, do the work that you set out to do. You always have to have a to-do list. This will help you by reminding you of the things that need to be done and also in the order in which you should do them. What are the obstacles that usually challenge us to stick to our time? Many of us fear change, we don't like to be uncertain, and we mostly have a lack of time. People can keep us or lead us off the right track. We can have a general lack of motivation, being able to say no, not being able to prioritize, and also looking at the importance of tasks, not being able to set them in the right order. In other words, by doing the less important things before we've sorted out the most urgent issues first. Next topic we look at is goals, and it links with our time management. If you want to choose relevant life goals for yourself, you need to first of all sit down quietly, take 20 to 30 minutes of your day and reflect on what you really need in life and what you have to do to get there. It will entail thinking about what's the most important to you. In other words, what do you want to achieve in life? Think about what you want and also about how you want other people to think about you once you are not there anymore. List the things you'd like to do in life. There's often not time to do all the things we want to, so choose the best things of the list first. If you cannot come up with life goals at that specific moment, it's not a problem. List the things that you want to do and you can go over it in the next 6 months. Our goals might change again. Continue to explore every option that you have and live your dream. Now, what is a good method to create actionable goals? Because we can plan our goals, but they need to be or have certain characteristics if we wish to achieve them. And we use the SMART method here. The S in SMART is for specific. In other words, you need to answer questions about your goal, like who, what, where, etc. The second one, the M, is for measurable, and that means a goal always has to be quantifiable. Attainable is next. That means the goal you set should be realistic. Relevance is important. In other words, this goal that you are setting, is it relevant for your life, and will it be worthwhile to achieve this goal? Last of all, the T in SMART is for time related, and this refers to the fact that you always need to set a time limit to it. So write down a due date to when you would like to have achieved that goal, because this will keep you on track and prevent you from getting sidetracked or the roadblocks, as they say, from getting in the way. We look at our study skills. Now, what are the things we can do to make studying easier? A quiet place is important, a place where you are not distracted from what you are trying to learn. Set a specific time that you will study by drawing up a study timetable. Choose specific days for the specific subjects. All the material should be ready before you start. Put your phone on silent, or even better, put it out of sight. Be positive. Attitude has a lot to do with the success you have. You will feel less burdened if you approach things positively, and you'll also be able to learn faster. Take time to determine your study method, and then you do what suits you best. Do not procrastinate. That means don't put off what you need to do today, because at the end you might find you do not have enough time left to complete what you needed to do. Finding a study buddy can be very useful because you can challenge one another, work through questions together, and sort out what is unclear. Don't let social activities take the priority before studying. It's important to socialize, but studies should come first. Always memorize bold vocabulary words in the text, because that usually shows you the main ideas. Prioritize your time. First, go about to study the most difficult content and then move on to the rest of the work. If you can, take some practice tests, because that will help you in already seeing how the questions will be structured and how you should approach each of them in the exam. If there are review sessions, always go to these, as teachers and lecturers tend to highlight what is most important for the examinations. Then you should always also be able to relax. Set some time aside after you've worked hard, de-stress, because you do not want to burn yourself out before the exams have even started. That to sleep enough links with being relaxed. It's very important. Getting enough sleep. Don't study throughout the night and get only 2 hours in. That will not work. Next of all, we go over to a totally different topic. Now this forms part of the personality skills, the personal skills of the learner. You need to get to know your own personality well. What is personality? It's a combination of emotional, attitudinal, and behavioral response patterns. And it is something that distinguishes you from other people, and it's based on your behavior and personality traits. There are 5 broad domains that are important when we look at each person's personality. And the first 3 you can see on the slide here. Number 1 is openness to experience. 2 is conscientiousness. 3 is extroversion or introversion. And we'll get to the next 2 on our next slide. Now I'm going to look at conscientiousness. What does it mean? It means when we look at being efficient or organized versus being the opposite, of course. If you are a conscientious person, you'll be organized and dependable, and you'll have self-discipline. You will act dutifully, and you'll always aim to achieve what you set out to do. You will be able to control as well as direct your impulses. You generally have a preference for planned rather than spontaneous behavior if you are conscientious. Then we come to the characteristic of being an extrovert or an introvert. Now, an extrovert is a person who experiences very high levels of energy, has positive emotions, and is usually very assertive. He or she enjoys the attention and the company of others. It's a sociable person who seeks stimulation in the company of others, and they're usually very talkative. An introvert, on the other hand, has lower social energy levels. They are more quiet and low-key and less involved in the social world. We shouldn't interpret this behavior as shyness or depression. It's just the type of personality. These people are more independent of their social world than extroverts. They would rather spend time alone and they need less stimulation than extroverts. They are usually also more reserved in social situations. The fourth type or the fourth characteristic that we look at when we look at personality is agreeableness. Now, when you're agreeable, you are friendly and compassionate. When you're not an agreeable person, you are mostly analytical or detached from others. An agreeable person will get along with most of people that he or she meets. He's compassionate and cooperative, trusting and helpful, will usually have a very good temper and is able to compromise his own interests with that of others. It's also a more optimistic type of person, and we generally refer to these people as team players. A disagreeable person, on the other hand, more takes care of his or her self-interests and also gives it priority above that of other people's. The person is unconcerned about other people's well-being. Sometimes it can be a cautious person, mostly unfriendly, and he or she will view others with skepticism. The fifth trait we look at, neuroticism. Now, when you're a neurotic person, you are sensitive and nervous. When you're not a neurotic person, you'll be secure and confident. Neurotic people experience a lot of negative emotions, for instance, anger, anxiety, depression, and vulnerability. They've got a low degree of emotional stability, and they also struggle more to control their impulses, and they don't have a very high tolerance for stress. Emotionally, they are reactive, and as we said, vulnerable to stress, and even an ordinary situation might seem threatening to a neurotic person. Minor frustrations can become difficult for them. Their emotions usually come to the surface negatively. If the negative emotions persist for a long period of time, we usually find that these people are often in a very bad mood. They are pessimistic. Towards work, for instance, they will feel that work interferes with the rest of their life. They will also experience that their thinking ability is affected negatively due to their negative emotions. So we will obviously strive to be somebody who is low and in neuroticism, because that means that we'll be less easily upset and less emotionally reactive. We'll be calmer, experience more positive feelings, and you'll be an emotionally stable person. Okay, that brings us to the end of that. Now, an aspect of career guidance is another important part of Unit 3. And I thought it good to look at the application letter and form very shortly. Now, why are these two so important? The employer receives hundreds of applications. Your CV should create the right impression. You should state why you would like the job, and you should also present yourself in such a manner that you impress your prospective employer. In the application form, it's important to complete it without any mistakes, and always rather practice first on how you're going to fill it in, and then hand in or send in the final copy. Before you write anything, make sure that you understand everything that they want you to do or that they want you to answer on the form. Complete everything on the form. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems trivial to you. Write in clear and neat handwriting. If the instruction says use capital letters, it's important that you do so. If you struggle in completing an application form, rather ask for help. Also, take note that your answers should be clear and that everything on the application form should correlate with what you have said on the CV. Your application form will tell a lot about you at a first glance, and it should be complemented by your CV, by your curriculum vitae. Let's see. When you hand in this to the employer or the prospective employer, it provides them with an overview of your experience and your qualifications. Most potential employers use the curriculum vitae to screen applicants, and it's usually based on your CV that you are called back or that you are invited for an interview. The next domain in Unit 3 is daily living skills, and here we would very shortly like to look at the common diseases once more, especially here with reference to prevention, early detection, and as we know, these are important because, as they say, prevention is the best cure. Okay. And we start off by quickly looking at cardiovascular diseases. This is a broad term for a range of diseases that all refer to the heart or the blood vessels. Malaria is a disease that a person gets when he or she is bitten by an infected mosquito. Parasites enter the bloodstreams and they start to multiply inside the red blood cells. Tuberculosis is another. It's also called by a bacterium called the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And important to note here that if you are a healthy person with a healthy immune system, you will probably, even if you are infected with this bacteria, only have a 10% chance of actually activating the TB and having active symptoms. Whereas if you have a weak immune system, for instance, you've got HIV or another serious illness, the risk of the active symptomatic disease increases with 10% each year. That is why we so often hear that HIV positive people die of tuberculosis. Diabetes, the next one, this is a chronic disease and it's characterized by very high levels of sugar in the blood. There are two types, 1 and 2. Then we go over to the cold and flus. That's something we are all familiar with. It's not the same thing. A cold has milder symptoms, and a flu is something that's more serious. It will make you iller for a few days, even weeks, and it can even result in something more serious like pneumonia. Next point, sex, sexuality, and sexual preferences. I'd like to look at the short definition of each of these. If we talk about sexuality, we often think that it's only younger learners or teenagers that have questions about sexuality, but there are actually a lot of adults who also have questions that are important. Sex is something that refers to, in this specific context, to whether you are male or female. Intercourse, on the other hand, refers to the physical act between two people with a purpose to reproduce. Sexuality, as we say, is part of your personality, and it refers to the relationship you have with your own body. So it's very personal. What influences your sexuality? Your image and identity, for instance, the gender roles that your parents or people around you brought you up with, which leads to certain beliefs, and also we are exposed to different values about our own sexuality as we grow up. This provides us with certain knowledge about ourselves, and in the end it forms part of our own sexuality. Your sexuality starts taking shape when you are very young, and the way you perceive your own sexuality will differ from that of a friend's. It's shaped, as I said, by culture and beliefs, but also by the genes that you've inherited and the environment that you live in, the experiences you've been exposed to, as well as your own personal preferences. Now, these preferences that we talk about in sexual terms, it will refer to whether you choose to enter a romantic relationship with the opposite sex, or whether you prefer to enter into a romantic relationship with somebody of the same sex as you. Some people even prefer not to have any relationship at all. Next, on the topic of sexuality, we look at risky sexual behavior for adolescents. Now, we have adolescents engaging in sexual activities for various reasons. First of all, it might be because of lack of parental guidance and monitoring. Adolescents are not ready to handle sexual relationships. Without guidance, they might enter or engage in risky situations. Peer pressure, as has been mentioned before, when a learner or a young student fears the rejection of the group, when they don't follow and do what's expected of them, they might also engage in risky behavior. Some learners are curious. They want to experience what they think people always talk about. Then some learners have a higher desire or need for intimacy. They want to be intimate with a person. Sometimes it doesn't matter who that person is. Sadly, we also have that the history of sexual abuse plays a large role. We know that learners who have been abused sexually are often more promiscuous and more likely to engage in risky behavior. Alcohol and drug abuse might play a role in the sense that it affects the reasoning abilities, causes a loss of inhibitions, and once more, a learner is then more likely to engage in sexual behavior. Sexual behavior, or risky sexual behavior rather, has some serious consequences. Of course, you've got a higher risk of getting a sexually transmitted disease, including HIV. You can even become pregnant if you don't take precautions. And we know that pregnancy and teenagers don't go hand in hand because it leads to maternal and child poverty in many cases. Let's look at some of the commonly transmitted sexual diseases. We have the human papilloma virus, which eventually can lead to cervical cancer as well as cancer of the anus. Then we've got chlamydia and trichomoniasis, which are just some of them. There are more. Something that you really need to note and need to make learners aware of is that many of these sexual diseases are asymptomatic. In other words, you don't detect them until it is too late. It doesn't mean that you have to have sexual intercourse to get a sexually transmitted disease. Sometimes contact with the skin, for instance in HPV, is always necessary, and performing oral sex or having anal sex can also lead to transmitting a sexual disease. What one should look out for as well is that the infected mother can transmit these infections to the unborn baby, and the most dangerous ones in these cases are syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, HPV, as well as HIV, which can have serious consequences to the baby's health. We said that one effect or one result of risky behavior, sexual behavior, is teenage pregnancy. And a lot of problems are associated with this. Social, financial, health, as well as emotional. Let's quickly run through them. One of the social problems is that a teenager who has a baby has a lot of other responsibilities that his or her peers do not. And while they are out having fun, he or she has to take care of a baby. This person is more likely to drop out of school. Okay, we're referring mostly to the girls here, but boys are also influenced. And we know that when a learner's education is disrupted, it has long-lasting negative consequences. This now then will lead to a lower income than a child that has finished school. Now the whole struggle starts to find work, and jobs are changed frequently just to try and make ends meet. The mother and the child becomes specifically vulnerable to domestic violence, abuse. The mother might even turn to prostitution and often become involved in drugs and crime as well. That leaves the child with little guidance, which in the end might lead the child to become a gang member, use drugs, drop out of school, and also commit crime. So thus a vicious cycle is started. The young father, as we said, the father also has his own set of problems. He might be expected to support the baby while still at school and has to deal with what his friends think about it. He might also even be accused of raping the girl by the girl's parents. Financial problems are obvious. No teenager is ready to cope with the financial burden that a baby brings, and they often can't even afford medical care. The father-to-be, he is very accountable in many cases for the financial side and has to contribute towards the baby, and he has to be involved in the decisions regarding the upbringing of the child as well. What are the health problems? Because the teenager's body is not ready to have a baby, it can have serious consequences for both the mother and the unborn baby. Teenagers seldom follow a healthy diet, which affects the fetus and can even endanger the life of the fetus. Some teenagers smoke and drink. This might lead to fetal alcohol syndrome and also to babies that are born underweight. There are emotional consequences too. It's very stressful to have a baby as a teenager. The teenager might experience terrible mood swings and have a lot of trouble coping with all the different emotions that he has to face and she has to face. Lastly, we get certain amount of girls that really suffer from bad depression, also called baby blues, after the birth of a baby. Some of them even tend to reject their babies because of this. Now, the sexually transmitted infections or diseases that we spoke about. How can we protect ourselves from these? The obvious and the best protection would be to abstain from sex. That means no vaginal, oral or anal sex should be engaged in to protect yourself 100%. Being faithful is another. Having one partner will make your risk less. Then, very importantly, teach everybody who is going to engage in sexual intercourse, especially situations that are risky, to use condoms, whether it's the male or the female condom, from the start to the end, even if sexual intercourse doesn't take place. Be sure that you know enough about methods of family planning. There are oral contraceptives, injections, and implants to prevent you from getting a baby, but these will not prevent you from getting HIV/AIDS or contracting a STI. When you're engaged in sex, you should be able to talk to your partner about the use of condoms and everything surrounding sex. You have the right to set the rules, and you have to make sure that you are protected. Please don't assume that if you are a lesbian that you are at less risk, because some of the diseases spread by skin-to-skin contact, and we get in lots of cases that women who have sex with other women also have had sex with men. Talk to your doctor, if necessary, about sexual relationships. Also talk about symptoms that you might be experiencing so that you can have them treated. There's no need to be embarrassed about it. For women, it's very important to have a yearly pelvic examination. When you speak to your doctor, you should also ask the doctor whether you should be tested for STIs and if you should go for retesting. The sooner that any of these sexually transmitted diseases are found, the easier they'll be treated. Avoid using drugs and alcohol. We said it only leads you to risky sexual behavior because you lose your inhibitions and you often lose control of what you are doing. HIV/AIDS, obviously, in the worst scenario, you are going to have to face an infection of HIV, and in such instances, it's important that we know when should we go for testing and what does counseling entail. HIV is tested by taking a blood sample, and it's processed by trained health workers. Nowadays, the results are available immediately. Remember that this test can only say whether you're infected or not. It cannot determine whether you will get AIDS. What happens with HIV? We said it weakens the body's immune system, and then it becomes difficult for the body to fight any other infection. There is antiretroviral medication available, which will help the body resist the virus, but as we've said repeatedly, it cannot kill the virus. Something to note, in a job situation or whichever situation you might be in, nobody can force anybody to go for an HIV/AIDS test. When you decide to go for counseling and testing, once you found that you are HIV positive, remember the following. consent. As we said, you cannot be forced to go for counseling, you cannot be forced to take a test, and if you are under 16, you need the consent of the parents or the guardians. Confidentiality is crucial. Nobody has the right to discuss your HIV results with anyone else. It's illegal to do that. When you go for the test, you should go for counseling, or usually they insist on having a bit of counseling before as well as after the test. Ensure that you receive the correct test results, very important. Now, what is the connection between prevention, care and treatment? You need to get information on how you can prevent yourself now from spreading HIV. Also, how can you care for yourself now, what treatment is available, and also which HIV groups are there to assist you emotionally. Okay, that brings us now to the end of this session, and I will continue with Unit 3 in Part 4.